This is test 65, section 4, question 8. It starts out, union member. Some members of our labor union are calling for an immediate strike. Okay, so some people are upset about something and they want to strike now. But a strike would cut into our strike fund and would, in addition, lead to a steep fine. Okay, so there's two consequences for calling a strike, causing us to suffer a major financial loss. Therefore, we must not strike now. Okay, this immediately I'm thinking about this argument as one of those arguments in which the LSAT is telling us something bad that will happen and therefore we shouldn't do it. Or we shouldn't do X because these other consequences will happen, but it's not talking about the benefits.
Yeah, what were the purposes of the strike in the first place? Like, what are they calling to strike about? Because if the reason why they're striking is, a workplace safety issue, like how about we work in an office and everybody in the office has COVID and the boss is still making us come to the office every day?
Yep.
And some people in the union are like, we should go on strike. This sucks. If the strike is going to save your life because you don't get COVID, who gives a shit if you have a major financial loss?
Yeah. Also, I would even question this major financial loss. Like, maybe the strike would result in a better negotiation agreement.
Yeah, if you're striking for more wages,
you lose money in the short run, but you gain it in the long run. So this whole thing is just shitty.
Yeah, I also noticed a strike would cut into our strike fund.
That's the point of the strike fund.
Exactly. I'm like, well, wait a second. A strike will always cut into our strike fund. We have a strike fund
for strikes
so that we can strike. I mean, it says it right in the name. I don't know why we have a strike fund if we're not going to use it to strike. So it's one of these objections that you could always make. Like, when is that going to change?
It's never going to change. Don't go to the grocery store. If you go, you're going to cut into your grocery budget.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh no, you got to preserve that grocery budget. Don't want to go to the grocery store and spend that grocery money on groceries.
Yeah. Okay. So shitty argument all around.
Yep.
The question says the union member's argument is most vulnerable to criticism on the grounds that the phrase most vulnerable to criticism immediately screams flaw question to me. Essentially, the LSAT is asking me why or how is this argument flawed? And I'm going to go look for the criticism that the argument is most vulnerable to. Answer choice A. The argument fails to consider that a strike might cause the union to suffer a financial loss even if no fine were imposed. Okay, it does fail to consider the situation where no fine is imposed, but it doesn't matter. This would help the argument if anything. So I would move on.
Yeah. To back up a little bit on a flaw question, you can think of it in two steps, right? Did they do it? And is it a problem that they did that?
Yep.
Excuse me. So with A, they did it. They failed to consider many possibilities. They certainly did not mention, hey, even if we don't go on a strike, even if we don't get fined, we still might get a financial loss.
Yep.
They failed to consider that, but that possibility only helps them, doesn't hurt them. So they did it. It's just not a problem that they did it. And so we can't pick that for a flaw.
B, does the argument fail to define adequately what constitutes a major financial loss? Yeah, they failed to define that. They just left it up to us and just asserted that. But so what? We were arguing whether that would even happen.
That's almost never the right answer. You don't have to define every term in your argument. If you did, then every argument would have to come with a dictionary attached to it, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a premise of this argument that if we do the strike, we're going to suffer a major financial loss. I'm fully willing to give them yeah, you're going to suffer a major financial loss. Fine. I don't care. Even if you are, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't strike. There could be a million reasons why you should strike, even if you are going to incur a major financial loss. So,
because you may suffer an even greater one by not.
well, you
Or
might
whatever.
die if you're like striking for workplace safety, or you're
Yeah.
striking for, justice or whatever. There's a million reasons why it would be worth taking a major financial loss in order to strike.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to define adequately what constitutes a major financial loss. I'm perfectly willing to give this union member a major financial loss, whatever that means. Yes, you are going to suffer a
To go
major
ahead and
financial loss.
assume that it is a major
Yeah.
financial loss, even if it's not.
Yeah,
Let's just give it to him.
right. For
Yep.
purposes of argumentation, I'm willing to grant that as a premise of the argument. I'm not going to go, though, to the next step, which is therefore we must not strike. Because even if you are going to suffer a major financial loss, there still could be a million good reasons to strike. And so defining exactly what a major financial loss is beside the point. Just doesn't matter.
Excellent. C, fails to consider that the benefits to be gained from a strike might outweigh the costs. That's exactly how we started talking about this argument as soon as we finished reading it.
Yeah, that
It
was
does
Ben's.
fail to consider.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe they're striking for workplace safety. Maybe they're striking for the boss to, for like, stop being racist, stop being sexist, stop whatever. There could be a million things that you're striking for, and you could be sacrificing money. You could totally burn up 100% of your strike fund, and you could also get a huge fine, and you could have a gigantic major financial loss. And nonetheless, there might be benefits that are worth it.
By
And
the way,
that's the problem with the argument.
I am watching Fear City, or I just finished Fear City on Netflix. Have you heard of that?
No.
It's a documentary on the mob in New York City in the 1970s and 80s, and
Okay.
how Giuliani helped lead. Well, he was part of the team that prosecuted them under RICO. RICO was a new law at the time. It was actually written by a professor at Penn, I think, maybe, or Cornell. I can't remember. But anyways, it was new, and none of the police knew how to use it. It was too complicated for them. And so then the professor was like, hey, we got to train the police force. So they had like a seminar, and they're like, look, you can use this law to go after these organizations. You don't have to keep just going after the soldiers, right? The people on the street. You take out one person in a mob, but the mob continues.
Yeah.
Anyways, the point of RICO is to take out the whole organization, right? But the whole documentary was talking about how the mob had taken over the unions in New York City. And it was just crazy how many things they had infiltrated and how much money they were making. And a lot of strikes that were called for at that time were really called by the mob because they were just flexing their muscle to get whatever they wanted. Like if a company didn't want to go with them, they said, fine, we'll call a strike with the union that we control.
Okay.
Anyways, I'm just saying, listen, like, what the hell is the point of that? There's no point. It's a podcast. So anyways, I was thinking about this. It says fails to consider the benefits to be gained from a strike might outweigh the costs. Yeah. For example, if you don't strike, the mob is going to fucking knock some of your friends off. Right. And that's what they did.
Have you seen The Irishman?
I have. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. It's no big news that the unions are connected to the mob. That's sort of how it is. But
yeah, I think that they were they had a lot more control back in the 70s and 80s than they
do today.
That.
They got de-mobified because of RICO. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
At least that's what the documentary suggested. I have no clue. I learn everything from Netflix these days. D, the argument takes for granted that the most important factor. Okay, I'm already vomiting. Takes for granted means necessarily assumes. Does it have to assume that the most important factor? I actually wouldn't even keep reading.
Yeah, it goes on to talk about the labor union's bargaining position, which was not even part of the argument at all. I mean, they didn't talk about bargaining. They didn't talk about negotiating. All they said was, we're going to have a major financial loss, so we can't do it. That has nothing to do with their bargaining position.
I mean, yeah, you're going after the second part of this argument. I would even just say, like, did we care about the importance of the factor or what
Right.
was most important
This
versus?
is an important point, I guess, that we should make, that the fact that the union member only brought up one issue
Yeah.
does not mean that that's the only issue or the most important issue. We can't put those words in the union member's mouth, right? The next thing they might say is, putting that issue aside, we can't strike because of this other bigger reason,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they could have 10 other factors that are more important than this. This factor, according to the union member, seems to be sufficient, right? We can't
Mm-hmm.
strike because of our major financial loss. So the major financial loss is sufficient to
Yes.
conclude that we can't strike. But just because it's sufficient doesn't mean that there aren't other, even more important factors. There could be a million other factors that are even bigger than this one. The union member just
Yep.
happened to bring this one up, but there could be 10 others. And we don't know that the union member has necessarily assumed this.
Excellent. So, multiple reasons for getting rid of answers and being confident that they're wrong. E, fails to establish that there will be a better opportunity to strike at a later time. Yeah, the argument did fail to establish that. Said, hey, we can't strike now. It's like, okay, you never established that there would be a better time in the future, but that's irrelevant to what we're talking about here.
Well, as far as we know, this union member might never want to strike. Right? I
It's
mean,
always
that
yeah.
wasn't part of the argument. Like, we need to strike some other time. That's just not their point. Their point is, we're going to have a major financial loss. That might always be true. This union member might be like, oh yeah, no, we should never use our strike fund. We should never risk getting a steep fine. We cannot have these major financial losses. Maybe we should never ever strike. So why does the union member have to then establish that there will be a better opportunity to strike at a later time? That's not part of their argument.
Yeah.
C, because they ignored the benefits.
That's the answer.